The night was trying to kill her again. The wind screamed across the mesa like a living thing ripping at the boards of the cabin, until every nail groaned. The world outside had turned to white, endless, merciless white, the kind that swallowed sound and memory alike. Snow came down in thick sheets, burying fences, erasing the trail that led to the well. Inside, Talia Nez sat hunched near the fire, sewing up the same damn tear in her coat she'd fixed 3 times this winter. The needle trembled in her fingers, not from cold, she was used to that, but from the stillness pressing in on her from every wall. The kind of stillness that remembered. A kettle whistled faintly on the stove. She poured herself a cup of weak coffee bitter as regret, and stared into the flames. 6 winters. 6 Christmases alone on the high desert since the telegram came. Since Eli. The name still felt dangerous. She almost never said it aloud. He'd died near the Rio Bravo. The officer wrote ambush, no survivors buried where they fell. But sometimes, in the long hours between midnight and dawn, she swore she could still hear the echo of his horse's hooves in the canyon below. A sharp crack outside made her flinch. The sound of splintering wood. She froze, listening. The wind or something else. Then she heard it faint, but sure, the dull, rhythmic thud of hooves cutting through the snow. One after another. Slow. Staggering. Coming closer. Talia stood, her heart thudding as loud as the storm itself. No one traveled this pass in weather like this, not unless they had no choice. She reached for the shotgun leaning against the door frame and cocked it with a practiced hand. The hoofbeats stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the wind scraping across the windows like claws. Then 3 knocks. Hard. Desperate. Talia didn't move. She thought of her grandfather's words spoken long ago on nights like this. No one rides through a storm like that, unless they're running from something worse. Her breath fogged the air. Her palms itched with indecision. She could ignore it, pretend she hadn't heard. But what if whoever it was froze to death out there? She cursed softly in Navajo, unlatched the door, and pulled it open just enough to see. A figure stood on the porch, or what was left of one. The wind whipped snow around him in spirals. A man bent and trembling, half buried under frost. His horse stood behind him, sides heaving, eyes wild. The man's gloved hand lifted barely. "Ma'am," he rasped, voice cracked by cold. "Need shelter." Talia hesitated, muscles tight, then stepped aside. "Come in before the storm finishes what it started." He stumbled across the threshold, collapsing to his knees. She kicked the door shut behind him and pushed the latch into place, blocking out the gale. It took a while to bring him back. She stripped off his frozen coat and boots, working quick before frostbite could finish its work. The man was shivering so hard she thought his bones might break. His face was sharp beneath the frost, dark hair matted to his forehead, a scar cutting through his right eyebrow. She got a fire roaring higher, threw 2 extra logs on, and fetched a quilt from the bed. After a few minutes, color began to seep back into his face. He opened his eyes, gray as iron, sharp even through the fevered haze. "You're safe," she said, crouching beside him. "Storm's bad. You'd have frozen out there." He blinked, disoriented. "Didn't think anyone lived this far up. Most don't." "Lucky for me, then." "Lucky's not what I'd call it." She poured him a cup of coffee and held it out. "You drink before you speak again." He obeyed, hands trembling around the tin cup. Steam rose between them. "Name's Colt," he said finally. Colt Harrigan. The name hit her like a half-forgotten song. Something about it stirred an old ache, but she pushed it away. "Talia Nez," she said, voice even. This cabin's mine. So's that shotgun by the door. Don't give me reason to use it, and we'll get along fine. He gave a ghost of a smile. Fair enough. The fire popped, throwing orange light across his face. He looked rough, but not cruel, like a man who'd seen too much and carried it with him. His coat, hanging near the fire to dry, bore a torn patch she hadn't noticed before. She turned it idly and froze. A stitched insignia. Cavalry. U.S. 7th Regiment. Her husband's regiment. Talia set the coat down carefully, her chest tightening. Coincidence, maybe. The army was full of men. But her mind refused to believe in chance anymore. She sat back down across from him. You a soldier? Was. He said, eyes fixed on the flames. What brings you through this storm was soldier. He hesitated, jaw tightening. Just passing through, headed south. Didn't mean to trespass. She didn't buy it, but she said nothing. Hours passed. The wind outside refused to quit. Colt dozed by the fire, fevered and restless. Once he mumbled something, a name she couldn't quite catch. It sounded like Eli. Talia's stomach dropped. She turned toward him sharply. What did you say? No answer. Only the low murmur of wind and the crackle of burning wood. He was deep in dreams or memories. She sat back, pulse racing, staring at him, as if she could read the truth off his face. If he'd known Eli, if he'd been there, why was he here now at her door 6 years too late? Her eyes drifted to the window. The storm had turned the world outside into a white ocean. There would be no traveling tonight. No answers either. She rose, moved to the small table by the hearth, and began slicing bread. The knife trembled in her hand. You're not the only ghost out here, she whispered to no one. Near dawn, the fire had burned low. The storm still hammered the cabin. Colt stirred again, opening his eyes just enough to meet hers across the dim room. Thank you, he rasped. For what? For letting me in. Talia wanted to say she hadn't done it for him, that any decent person would have done the same. But the truth sat heavy on her tongue. She had opened that door because of the same thing that haunted her, the memory of a man she couldn't let go. She turned away. Rest. The storm's not letting up. He nodded faintly, eyelids falling shut again. She sat back in her chair, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, watching the snow drift past the window. Her heart thudded, unevenly torn between suspicion and something softer, something she didn't dare name. The world outside was nothing but white and wind and danger. Inside, a stranger slept by her fire. And for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. As the first pale light of morning crept over the mountains, Talia rose to stoke the fire. Colt's breathing was steady, now his face calmer. She hung his coat back on the peg, the cavalry patch facing inward, as if hiding its secret. But secrets had a way of surviving storms. And before this one ended, she'd learn exactly why a man named Colt Harrigan had come riding out of the white. Talia didn't sleep. She'd tried eyes shut tight, body curled beneath the thickest quilt she owned, but rest wouldn't come. Not with that stranger breathing softly across the room, not with her gut twisting around the name he'd murmured in his sleep. Eli. She hadn't heard it clearly the first time. Maybe it was nothing. A coincidence. Some other Eli from some other life. But her instincts, sharpened by 6 years of solitude and silence, told her different. People didn't ride into the middle of a blizzard by accident. They sure as hell didn't collapse on the porch of the woman who used to be married to a man they served with. If that's what this was. She rose with the gray light shoulders tight from a night spent half alert. Colt was still asleep, one arm flung over his face to shield from the dawn. She watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, the tension in his jaw even in rest. Something about him didn't sit right, not in a dangerous way. No, that was the problem. He seemed familiar, like an echo she'd forgotten how to place. She stoked the fire, added more wood, and poured coffee into the tin mugs. The sound of the kettle clicking into place finally stirred him. He blinked toward the light, confused for half a second, then sat up slowly, groaning as he did. "You made it through the night," she said, handing him a mug. He nodded, accepting it. "Wasn't sure I would." His voice was rougher this morning, like the cold had sanded it down. "You slept hard," she said. "Talked a little too." He froze mid-sip. "Nothing clear," she added, watching him, "just a name." He lowered the mug, jaw tightening. "Lots of names get stuck in a man's throat." "That one's been stuck in mine for 6 years," she replied, voice quiet but steady. His eyes met hers, sharp, unreadable. "I don't know what you think you heard. I think you said Eli." The silence stretched like rawhide drying in the sun. Colt stared into the fire. "Eli's a common name." "So's Harrigan," she said. "But here you are." He didn't answer. Just sipped the coffee, slower now, as if it burned. Talia sat across from him at the table, folding her hands. "Where were you stationed during the war?" He hesitated, then answered. "Out near the Rio Bravo." "Same as Eli." "What regiment?" "Why?" "Because my husband died there," she said. "In an ambush." His fingers tensed around the mug. "You asked me yesterday if I was a soldier," he said. "I said I was." "That part's true. The rest, I didn't come here to cause trouble. I was trying to ride south. The storm made that choice for me. You expect me to believe this is just chance?" He looked at her, then finally meeting her gaze with something like exhaustion, not physical, but moral, like he was tired of hiding whatever truth weighed him down. "I don't expect anything," he said. "You let me in when you didn't have to. That's more than I deserve." Talia leaned back slightly, studying him. "You're not just passing through." "No," he said after a beat. "I'm not." And that finally was honesty. The tension between them settled into a thick, uneasy quiet. Outside, the wind had quieted, though snow still fell soft and steady. The world had gone white again, but inside the cabin the air was warm and close, too close. Colt stood slowly, stretching sore limbs. He limped to the window and looked out over the ridge past the pines heavy with snow. "I came through this pass once before," he said quietly, "but back then, I left a man behind." Talia didn't speak. Her throat closed around the name she'd swallowed too many times. "I don't know why I ended up here," he continued. "But maybe I do. Maybe I'm just tired of running from ghosts." She stood crossed to the other side of the cabin and pulled a wool shawl over her shoulders. "You didn't end up here. You came. For a reason." He didn't argue. After a long moment, she turned back toward him. "You want to stay here, recover, fine. But don't lie to me. If you knew Eli, if you were there, I need to know." "I wasn't ready," he said, voice low. "Still ain't. But I will tell you. When it's time." She didn't press. But she didn't let go of the doubt either. Later that morning, as Colt helped her haul buckets from the well, slowly grimacing with every movement, a figure appeared in the distance, emerging from the trail like a wraith. Talia squinted and recognized the gait. Deputy Begay, she muttered. Colt straightened. Eli Begay, not her Eli, but the local lawman, part-time tracker, part-time preacher's son, rode in wrapped in a fur-lined coat rifle slung low. Miss Nez, he called out. Heard the storm got worse up this way. Thought I'd check in. Talia nodded. Appreciate it. His gaze shifted to Colt's brows, lifting slightly. You've got company. Colt stepped forward, extending a hand. Colt Harrigan. The deputy didn't take it at first. Just looked him over, noting the limp, the wear on his coat, the dried mud on his boots. You Army was. Which regiment? Colt's mouth twitched, and the pause before he answered was a second too long. 7th. Begay nodded once, slow. A lot of men from around here ended up in the 7th. Talia watched the exchange in silence. Every word was a weight. Well, Begay said, eventually storms lightening. You'll have clearer skies by tomorrow. Folks in town will be glad to hear you're doing all right, Miss Nez. She forced a smile. Tell them I appreciate the prayers. He tipped his hat, then turned to Colt. Hope you find what you're looking for, stranger. Colt said nothing. When the deputy was gone, Talia turned back toward the cabin. He didn't trust you, she said. I wouldn't either. She didn't reply. Not right away. Not until they stepped inside again, and the fire welcomed them back into its soft orange glow. He asked if you found what you're looking for. I haven't, Colt said. But I think I'm standing in front of it. That stopped her. She didn't ask what he meant. Not yet. Because part of her wasn't sure she was ready to hear it. That night, as Colt sat at the table carving wood with a small knife, nothing special, just whittling to pass the time, Talia sewed in silence by the hearth. The radio silence between them was starting to feel like a language all its own. The fire crackled, and somewhere deep inside her a fear she hadn't named in years stirred awake. What if Eli hadn't died alone? What if this man knew everything and was here because of it? Outside the wind had stilled, but inside the storm was only just beginning. Some wounds don't bleed, they whisper. The words echoed in Talia's mind as she chopped kindling behind the cabin. The rhythm of the axe splitting wood drowned beneath that voice, Colt's voice rattling around her chest, not her ears. He hadn't spoken those exact words, but everything about him said them, in his silence, in his eyes, in the way he carved shapes with no meaning just to keep his hands busy. She knew that kind of pain, worse than a clean wound, quieter, but deeper. The snow had eased overnight, leaving behind a brittle blue sky and powder-blanketed world. The kind of winter morning that looked soft until you stepped into it and felt the bite. She worked methodically, sweat cooling fast on the back of her neck. Inside, Colt had offered to fix a loose hinge on the front door. Another excuse to stay busy. Another reason not to talk. She didn't stop him. She didn't ask questions. But the weight of what she wanted to ask sat between her ribs like a knife she wouldn't pull. Just before noon, she saw movement along the trail, subtle, swaying, careful. A lone figure wrapped in a patchwork cloak. Her sharp eyes narrowed and softened in the same breath. Mika Yazzie. Talia wiped her palms on her skirt and walked to meet her boots crunching against snow. "Storm let you through," she called out. Mika offered a tight smile. "Barely. Brought you what you asked for, wild mint snake root, a little more black sage." Talia took the pouch with both hands. "Thank you. I've been rationing." Mika tilted her head, scanning the property. "You're not alone." Talia stiffened. "No." Mika followed her gaze toward the cabin. The curtains fluttered where someone had just pulled back. Colt watching them, seeing if he was being watched. He's still here. He helped with the roof yesterday. And with the door today, Mika said almost casually. Talia crossed her arms more to protect her chest than warm it. You want to say something, Mika, just say it. I will. Mika stepped closer, her voice low. I can feel it from the trees. He carries something old, Talia. Something dark. Talia sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. He knew Eli. Mika blinked slowly. You're sure he hasn't admitted it outright? But I know you. You think he's dangerous, no? Talia said, surprising herself with the certainty. Not in that way. He's just tied to something. Something he hasn't let go of. Mika touched her shoulder. Then the question is, have you? Talia didn't answer. Inside the cabin, Colt sat back from the door-frame tools spread beside him. He could hear their voices, couldn't make out words, but tone said enough. He was being discussed. He supposed he'd earned that. When they entered, Talia moved with her usual control, but Mika's eyes pinned him immediately. You're the stranger that showed up in a storm, she said. Colt rose, nodding. Yes, ma'am. I've seen plenty of men pass through these canyons, some on the run, some looking for something. You don't look like either. He didn't flinch. Maybe I'm both. Her eyes lingered, searching. Do you believe in spirits, Mr. Harrigan? I believe the dead don't stay dead if the living keep feeding them. Mika gave a single nod. Then I think we understand each other. She didn't stay long, just long enough to deliver herbs and a warning. Talia didn't need, voiced. When the door shut behind her, the cabin felt smaller somehow. Quieter. Colt returned to the door hinge. Talia returned to her seat by the fire, a half-mended scarf in her lap, untouched. You don't have to fix things to stay, she said. He looked up. I'm not trying to pay rent. Then what are you doing, Colt? He didn't answer right away. Hammer poised, breath held. I don't know, he said finally. I think I came here to bury something. But the longer I stay, the more I think, maybe I came to dig it up. The words settled between them like dust in a church pew. Talia folded the scarf slowly. You said you left a man behind, near the Rio Bravo. He nodded. You didn't say his name. I couldn't. Because it was Eli. Colt's hand dropped. The silence after was sharp. He died in my arms, Colt said, voice barely above a whisper. We were overrun. Too fast. He was shot trying to pull a younger kid out of the line. There was blood everywhere. We couldn't stop it. Talia pressed her lips together, fighting the rising tide behind her eyes. He said something before he went, Colt continued, not looking at her. He told me to find you, to make sure you were okay. He said you were strong, but you'd shut down, that if anyone could pull you back into life, it had to be someone who knew what it cost to survive. Talia covered her mouth, turned away. I never meant to show up like this, Colt said. I ran from that promise for years. I didn't think I could face you, not knowing I made it home and he didn't. She swallowed hard. Why now I got tired of running, and something told me if I didn't do it this winter, I never would. She faced him slowly. So that's what this is. A promise. It was, he said. At first. And now I don't know, he said. But I'd be lying if I said it hasn't become more than that. Talia's heart pounded in her ears. She didn't know whether to yell or cry or run out into the snow just to breathe. You should have told me. I know. I deserve to know who I was letting in. You're right. She stood, moved past him to the hearth, gripped the mantle like it was holding her up. He didn't follow, didn't speak, and somehow that restraint meant more than 1,000 apologies. That night, Talia couldn't sew. She couldn't even sit still. The memory of Colt's voice telling her about Eli's last breath wound around her like thorns. She stepped out into the cold for air. Stars glittered like broken glass above her. The wind had gone still again, like it was listening. She thought about Eli, about the way he used to laugh when he chopped wood, the calluses on his fingers, the way he sang under his breath when he thought she wasn't listening. She thought about Colt's silence, his guilt, the lines on his face that hadn't been there 6 years ago. Some wounds don't bleed. They whisper. And for the first time she was listening. Inside, Colt sat by the fire with the unfinished carving in his hand, a small horse, delicate and half-shaped. He turned it over in his palm, lost in it. Talia returned slowly, quietly. She didn't say anything. She just sat beside him. Close. Not touching, but close. The fire snapped softly. Neither moved. Neither spoke. But something between them had shifted, and the storm that had driven Colt here was no longer just outside. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty, it's just too full to speak. Talia didn't know when it had started. Maybe the night Colt told her about Eli. Maybe before that, when he first collapsed on her doorstep, half dead, and carrying the weight of her past, without knowing she'd see it in his eyes. But now, as the days melted into a strange, delicate rhythm, she realized the silence between them had shifted. It no longer pressed down like snow on an old roof. It hummed. It pulsed. It waited. They worked side by side without words. Sometimes he chopped wood while she mended curtains. Sometimes she cooked while he patched a saddle or carved small animals out of scrap wood. He never offered them to her, never explained them, just left them on the windowsill like offerings. She never asked, but she never moved them either. That morning, a coyote had come too close to the chicken coop. Colt spotted it before it got through the fence and scared it off with a warning shot. Talia came running, rifle in hand, breath fogging from her mouth. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. Wasn't brave, just hungry. Talia looked out into the trees, her breath slowing. Aren't we all? They didn't talk about it again. The cabin had never felt so alive. Or maybe she had just forgotten what company felt like, the real kind. Not just someone passing through. Not someone asking for supplies or a favor or news from town. But someone who stayed, who breathed beside you and made space for your silence without trying to fill it. She was in the kitchen when Colt came in from the barn, shaking snow from his coat. "You still like trout?" he asked casually, hanging the coat on the peg. Her hand paused on the jar of cornmeal. "You remember that?" "I remember Eli cursing because you always cooked it better than he did," he said. "Said you used witch magic." She smiled, small, crooked, but real. "It's just lemon and smoke." "I'll catch you one," he said. "Creek's running under the shelf ice. You won't catch anything in this weather." He shrugged. "Might still be worth the cold." She didn't stop him. When Colt returned an hour later, soaked to the knees and grinning with a fish in one hand, Talia was already setting a pan on the stove. He held it up like a trophy. "Dinner," he declared. She gave him a look. "You're soaked," but triumphant. "Boots off." And if you drip on my rug, I'm tossing you back in the creek." He laughed a sound that caught even him by surprise. It was rough-edged, unused, but warm. She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary, and then she turned back to the stove. They ate by the fire that night, knees almost touching, sharing the same pot of cornmeal and seared trout. No plates, just passing the pan between them. "I almost forgot what it's like," she said after a long, quiet stretch. "What eating with someone?" Colt nodded slowly. "I forgot too." Outside, snow drifted down in slow spirals, soft and soundless. Inside, the silence wrapped around them like a second quilt. He set the empty pan aside and leaned back against the wall. She sipped tea from a cracked mug, eyes flicking to him now and then. There were words in her mouth, questions, memories, but none of them came out. And still, something passed between them, a language deeper than talking. "There's a kind of silence that isn't empty," Colt said suddenly, his voice low. "It's just too full to speak." Talia didn't answer, but her fingers curled slightly around the edge of her cup. She knew that silence. She'd been living in it for years. Later that night, long after the dishes had been cleaned and the fire banked to coals, Talia couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the rafters, listening to the wind roll gently across the roof, like it was passing without malice for once. She thought about Colt, about the way he'd said her name once that morning like it mattered, about the pause in his breath whenever their hands brushed reaching for the same thing, about how he hadn't touched her, hadn't tried, hadn't even come close to crossing the space between them, but still made her feel seen. She rose quietly, padded barefoot into the main room. Colt sat by the fire carving again. He looked up, surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "You—" "Not really." He held out the small figure in his hand. A horse this time. Finely shaped its legs bent mid-run. "I thought you might want this one," he said. Talia took it slowly, cradling it in her palm. It was beautiful, simple, strong, like something Eli would have whittled during long camp nights, like something he might have handed her, if he'd come home. "Thank you," she said. Colt stood and walked to the stove. "Want tea?" She nodded and they moved quietly side by side, boiling water, adding herbs, settling into that gentle rhythm again. They didn't need to talk about ghosts tonight. Not yet. When they sat again by the fire, she surprised herself by speaking first. "I never buried him," she said. "Never had a body. Just a folded flag. An empty box." Colt's face tightened. He looked into his cup. "He made me promise to tell you something," he said. "If I ever made it out." She turned to him, heart thudding. "What?" He didn't answer right away. The moment hung between them like a breath held too long. He said, "Tell her I never regretted it. Not once." Talia's throat clenched. He said if it had to end that way, he was glad it was doing something right. And he said, "He loved you, but you already knew that." Tears welled hot and sudden. She bit them back, fists clenched in her lap. "I needed to hear it," she whispered. "Even if it's 6 years late." "I know," Colt said. "I'm sorry I waited." Silence again, but not empty. Just full. The fire burned low. Talia rested her hand on her knee, inches from Colt's. She didn't reach out. Neither did he. But they stayed there, the space between them humming. Not with grief. With something else. something new. The next morning, frost glazed the inside of the windows, and the sky had gone from silver to blue. Talia rose before dawn, wrapped herself in wool, and stood out on the porch with a mug in hand, watching the woods. Inside, she could hear Colt moving. There was comfort in that sound, a rhythm forming, something worth protecting. She didn't know what this was becoming. She didn't know how long it would last. But she knew she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't scare her. It's not the storm that finds you. It's the things it drives out of hiding. The sound came just after dawn. Not wind, not the creak of old beams or the groan of settling snow. No, this was rhythmic, deliberate, boots in snow. Talia was at the stove pouring water into a pot when her spine stiffened. She paused, mid-motion, eyes narrowing. Colt heard it too. He was already by the window, body tense, half-shadowed in the soft morning light. "Someone's coming," he said, voice low. Talia set the pot down gently and moved toward the shotgun by the door. She didn't have to ask Colt if he recognized the sound. His shoulders had gone rigid, not with surprise, but with recognition. Outside, a figure emerged slowly from the trees. Another behind him. One horse, one rider. One on foot. Colt cursed under his breath. "You know them," he nodded once. "The one on the horse is Jameson, ex-cavalry. He served under the same banner. And the one walking, that's a problem." Talia didn't press. She pulled the door open a crack, letting cold rush in like a warning. The two men stopped just outside the porch. The one walking tall, lean, with a rifle slung lazy across his back, looked up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, hell," he drawled. "If it isn't Colt Harrigan, I told him you were still breathing." Colt stepped out slowly, hands loose at his sides. "Dawes." "I thought you were headed south," Dawes said. "Didn't know you'd gone domestic." Jameson stayed quiet on his horse face, unreadable under the brim of his hat. He looked older than Colt remembered, weathered, but still dangerous. Colt kept his voice steady. "You're a long way from anywhere that matters. What do you want?" Dawes smiled wider. "I heard a name float down the trail. Thought it might belong to a ghost. But then that ghost rode off with a saddlebag full of questions and no answers. So I followed." Talia stepped forward, shotgun tucked but ready. "This is private land," she said evenly. "If you're looking to trespass, do it fast or not at all." Dawes chuckled. "I like her. She'll shoot you before you finish that sentence," Colt added. Jameson finally dismounted. "We're not here for a fight. Just passing through." "No one just passes through a storm trail unless they're chasing something," Talia said. "Or someone." Dawes's eyes glittered with amusement. "Ain't chasing. Just curious. Harrigan left a lot behind. Men don't just vanish from outfits like ours. Not without leaving stories behind." Colt stepped closer. The story ended at the River Dawes. Same place Eli did. A beat passed. Cold, still air. Dawes's smile faded. Eli Nez was a good man. Deserved better than a ditch and silence. Talia felt the heat rise in her chest, grief clawing up like it was fresh again. "You didn't know him," she said. "I knew the kind of men that get killed trying to save the ones who don't deserve it." The tension hit hard and fast. Colt stepped between them. "What do you want?" he asked again. Dawes turned, made a show of looking at the snow-covered hills. "Maybe nothing. Maybe just wanted to see if ghosts like you settle. Get soft." "I haven't," Colt said. "Good," Dawes said, his voice lowering. "Because there's talk, bad talk, about that night. about who lived and who ran. Jameson finally spoke quiet but firm. That's enough. Dawes shot him a look but didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Colt and tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Enjoy the fire, Harrigan. Might be the last warm one you get. They walked off without another word. Colt didn't move until they were gone. Talia stood beside him, hands clenched, heart racing. What was that, she asked. Colt exhaled, jaw tight. That was the past. Coming to see if it still had a hold on me. Talia looked up at him. Does it? He didn't answer. Back inside, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. This one was sharper, filled with echoes. Talia poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed one to Colt. His hands were steady. Too steady. He thinks you ran, she said. I didn't. I believe you. Colt stared into the fire eyes far away. Eli was already dying. I stayed with him, covered his body. Dawes, he was scouting our flank. Never came back. After the shooting stopped, he walked in like it was nothing. Talia listened, her chest tight. Command blamed the terrain. Bad intel. The ambush was never supposed to happen. But Dawes had eyes on that ridge. He should have seen it coming. I think he did. And let it happen. Talia's voice was quiet. You think he left Eli there on purpose? I know he did. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Why? Because Eli was the kind of man who made cowards feel like cowards. You either followed him or you hated him. Dawes wasn't the following type. Silence settled again. Colt's voice dropped lower. It's not the storm that finds you. It's the things it drives out of hiding. Talia looked into the fire. Then the storm just brought us a warning. Colt nodded. And it won't be the last. That night, Talia couldn't rest. Every creak made her reach for the rifle. Every shadow outside the window felt like Dawes waiting. When sleep came, it was restless and thin. And when she woke before dawn, Colt was already gone. She found him at the edge of the ridge, watching the tree line. I couldn't sleep, he said without turning. I keep seeing that night, over and over. She moved beside him, pulled her shawl tighter. That's what ghosts do, until we give them something else. He looked down at her eyes, clearer than they'd been in days. What if Dawes comes back? Then we don't answer the door unarmed. He smiled faintly. She wasn't joking. Inside, she boiled sage in a small pot and set the carving of the horse, his gift, on the mantel. A reminder they weren't hiding anymore. Later that day, hoofprints appeared around the creek. Fresh, circling, watching. They knew Dawes wasn't done. What the fire doesn't burn, it reveals. The wind had picked up again. Not the furious scream of a blizzard, but that low, constant push like something breathing through the trees. A warning. Not loud, but steady. The kind of sound you felt in your ribs more than your ears. Talia stood near the hearth, staring into the flames that licked quietly at the logs. Colt was outside repairing the barn door Dawes had rattled with his arrival. He hadn't said it, but she knew he expected them to come back. And next time they wouldn't be talking. She stirred the coals gently, pushing a half-burned log to the side. As she did, something shifted under the grate. Not embers. Not ash. A corner of something blackened but intact. She reached down with the fire poker and pried it loose. It was a tin. Small. Warped with heat. Soot-covered. She knelt, heart kicking up in her chest. Carefully, she pulled it from the hearth, the metal still warm to the touch. She hadn't seen it before, and she'd lived with that fireplace for 6 winters. It must have been hidden inside the stonework, maybe loosened by age, or by the fire finally reaching something it hadn't in years. Inside, folded and sealed in wax paper, was a letter. She knew the handwriting before she even opened it. Eli. Her breath caught. Fingers trembling, she peeled back the wrapping and began to read. Talia. If this ever finds its way to you, then I didn't. And if Colt kept his promise, then maybe he's near. Maybe he's brought the storm with him. Maybe he is the storm. But if he's there, you're not alone. I need you to know I made my choices. I saw the trap before it was too late. I could have run. I didn't. Because there was a boy, no more than 17, scared out of his damn mind, and I thought if I don't stop this bullet, it's going through him. That's not courage. That's love. Love for people I never knew. Love for you. Love for the kind of man I wanted to be. Colt didn't run, Talia. Don't let anyone lie about that. He stayed. He stayed when it would have been easier to vanish. And I trust him with something bigger than my life. I trust him with yours. Don't let grief keep you locked behind that door. Let him in. Let yourself out. Always riding home to you, Eli. Her eyes blurred. She sat down on the edge of the hearth, the paper trembling in her hands. 6 years of silence cracked open by a fire and a forgotten tin. The words wrapped around her like a second skin. Not closure, no, she wasn't sure she believed in that anymore. But truth. Solid. Heavy. Real. Behind her, the door opened. Colt stepped in snow, still on his shoulders, his hat clutched in one hand. He stopped when he saw her face. What is it? She didn't speak, just held out the letter with both hands. He took it carefully, read in silence. His eyes moved slowly across the page. When he finished, he sat down on the floor across from her. You found this now, he asked. She nodded. It was behind the hearthstone, or inside it. Hidden. He ran a hand through his hair. He must have written it before we shipped out. I had no idea. I thought I was losing pieces of him every year, she said quietly. Turns out he left one I hadn't even touched yet. Colt folded the letter gently like it was made of glass. I kept his words, he said. But this feels like hearing him again. Talia wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. He trusted you. Colt's jaw clenched. I tried to live up to that. You are. They sat for a long time, not talking, just watching the fire, the tin beside them, like a shared heart. What the fire doesn't burn, Talia said finally, it reveals. Colt looked at her. You think he meant for us to find it now, I think. He knew I'd need it when I was ready. Colt didn't argue. Instead, he said Dawes is going to come back. I know. And if he starts talking, spreading lies about that ambush, it won't just stain me. It'll stain Eli. Everything he did. Then we don't let him. Colt looked surprised. She met his eyes. You stayed with Eli. I believe that. And now I stay with you. It wasn't a declaration. It was a pact. That night, Talia took the letter and folded it into a small cedar box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were a few of Eli's things, a bandana, a silver coin he used to flip a photograph faded with time. She placed the letter on the top. then closed the lid. Not to forget, but to honor. Later, Colt sat near the fire again, working on another carving. This one was different, a circle, a ring. He didn't explain it, but she watched his hands shape it slowly, patiently. "What is it?" she asked. He glanced up. A promise. She didn't ask to whom. She didn't need to. Outside, the wind had gone still again, but tracks had appeared near the wood line. Boot prints. Fresh. Watching. By morning, the barn door was hanging crooked again. Someone had tried to open it in the night, but hadn't gotten in. Colt fixed it with barely a word. Talia stood beside him with a rifle in hand. Whatever Dawes was planning, he was circling, testing, looking for weakness. But there was none left to find. Not here, not anymore. A man can change his trail, but not the name that follows him. The day was silent, like the mountain was holding its breath. No birdsong, no wind, no distant crackle of branches. Just the heavy stillness that settled when trouble drew close but hadn't yet arrived. Colt stood near the edge of the property, watching the prints Dawes had left behind. They weren't from a quick pass-through. They lingered, doubled back, circled, predatory. Behind him, Talia approached boots crunching soft over packed snow. She didn't ask what he was thinking, she already knew. "He's baiting you," she said. Colt nodded. "He wants me to come looking. He's not stupid." "No," Colt said. "He's worse. He's patient." They stood together, eyes on the woods. "We can't just wait for him to decide when this ends," Talia said. "You said it yourself, he's poisoning Eli's name. Yours too." Colt exhaled slowly. "He's already been laying tracks through the valley. He'll twist the story. Say I ran. Say Eli died because of me." Talia's jaw tightened. "Then we get ahead of him." He turned toward her. "That means going to town, telling folks before he does. Facing people I've avoided for years. You still want to live like a ghost?" he said. "But I might have to die with one." She stepped closer, voice firm. "You said you didn't run, I didn't. Then stop living like you did." Colt met her gaze, something flickering behind his eyes, old fear, old shame. But underneath that something else, resolve. By midday, they'd packed 2 horses, one with supplies, the other with a rifle strapped to the saddle. Colt hadn't worn his uniform coat in years. It still bore the insignia of the 7th, though the color had faded and the brass buttons had dulled with time. He wore it now. Talia tightened the cinch on her horse and looked at him. "You sure about this?" "No," he said. "But I know what happens if I don't." She mounted first, leading the way through the trail cut into the snow. Colt followed. They rode in silence, both of them listening for hoofbeats behind them, for movement in the brush, for the lies they'd have to kill before they took root. It was late afternoon when they reached the edge of town. Smoke curled from chimneys. Children played in the distance. Dogs barked, then quieted. It looked like any other day, but to Colt, it felt like walking into a memory sharpened by regret. They tied the horses outside the general store. Heads turned before he even stepped onto the boardwalk. Familiar faces blinked, whispered. One man narrowed his eyes, then tipped his hat stiffly. Another spat into the dirt. Talia stayed close but didn't speak for him. Colt moved toward the sheriff's office first. Not because it was safe, but because it was central. Sheriff Glenn stood on the porch, arms folded. He hadn't aged well, gray hair thinned, gut heavier, but his eyes were still sharp, still suspicious. "Harrigan," he said flatly. "I'll be damned." Colt nodded once. I need to talk. That's usually what the guilty say. I'm not asking for a trial, Colt said. Just 10 minutes. Glenn looked at Talia, then back at him. You got 5. Inside, Colt told him everything. The ridge, the ambush, Eli dying in his arms, Dawes not showing until it was over. Glenn didn't interrupt, didn't blink. When it was over, he asked, You have proof? Colt shook his head. No. Just the truth. Glenn leaned back in his chair. Truth's tricky. Folks believe what they hear first. And Dawes talks fast. He talks lies. You ready to say that in front of a room full of men who think you left their sons to die? Colt didn't flinch. Yes. They left the office and Talia led him down Main Street toward the meeting hall. Word spread fast in towns like this. By the time they arrived, half the town was already gathered. The rest would come when word reached their porches. Deputy Begay stood by the door, arms crossed. He looked Colt up and down. You brought your storm with you, he said. Colt nodded. Wasn't mine to bring. But I'll end it. Inside the hall buzzed with low voices. Men stood near the back, hands on hips. Women sat with wary eyes. Talia stood near the front, steady and still. Colt took the platform. My name is Colt Harrigan, he began, voice steady. I rode with the 7th. I fought beside men you knew. Some of them didn't come home. Murmurs rose. Colt didn't pause. I didn't run. I didn't abandon anyone. I stayed when I could have fled. I buried Eli Nez with my own hands and carried the last thing he ever said to his wife. I've lived in silence since then. Not because I was guilty, but because I was afraid no one would care about the truth. He looked across the room. Dawes is lying. He wants you to believe I'm a coward, because that makes it easier to live with what he did. A woman in the crowd stood Mika Yazzie. She lifted the cedar box in her hands. This letter was found in Eli's own hand, she said, hidden in his home. It names Colt. It clears him. And it speaks of love, not betrayal. The room shifted, a slow tide of belief-doubt emotion. Then the back door creaked open. Dawes stepped in. No hat. No smile this time. Just a slow clap. Well done, he said. Hell of a speech. Colt turned toward him, voice cold. You have something to say it. Dawes walked forward, boots echoing on the planks. I say a lot of things. What matters is what they believe. He turned toward the crowd. Who do you trust? He asked. The man who disappeared for years, or the ones who stayed, who lived with the shame of that battle? Colt took a step forward. You were on the ridge. You saw the ambush coming. You let it happen. You got proof. Colt didn't answer. But Talia did. She pulled from her coat a second letter, one they hadn't shown yet. A copy made from Eli's original, scrawled with his handwriting, names, positions, sketches of the ridge. And the line, Dawes held the high ground. He never fired a shot. Gasps echoed, whispers, anger. Dawes stared at the paper. His face didn't change, but he didn't say another word. Afterward, Colt stood alone on the boardwalk. People filtered past, some nodded. Some avoided him. A few muttered thanks. Talia joined him as the sun dropped behind the ridge. They know now, she said. Some do, he replied. The rest, maybe someday. She looked up at him. A man can change his trail, she said, but not the name that follows him. He nodded. But maybe, He can decide what it means. They didn't stay in town that night. They rode home in the dark stars, overhead snow whispering under hoof. Talia rode close. And for the first time in a long time, Colt didn't feel like a ghost chasing his own shadow. He felt real. The closest two people can be is the space where neither has to speak to be understood. The cabin had never felt so quiet. Not the heavy, haunted silence of grief, but something deeper, intimate, weightless, like the air had thinned just enough to let truth move freely through it. Colt stood at the sink, washing the dust of the road from his hands. The light outside had softened into that blue dusk that always made the pines look taller, older. He could still hear the echoes of the town hall Dawes's face when Eli's letter was read, the slow shift in the room, as the truth sank in like thaw into hard soil. He had expected relief, maybe even peace. But what he felt was more complicated. It was quiet. Not outside, inside. Talia placed 2 steaming bowls of stew on the table, then sat without a word. Colt joined her, and for the first few minutes, they ate in silence the way people do when they no longer need to fill space to feel close. It was Talia who finally broke it. "People are going to talk," she said. "Let them. They'll say you waited too long to come back, that you lived like a coward." "I did wait too long," he admitted, setting down his spoon. "But I didn't hide." She nodded, accepting his honesty. "And Dawes gone," Colt said. "He'll vanish before sunrise. That town doesn't want him anymore. He'll still want revenge." "Probably." But he lost his voice. They sat in that thought together, the stew growing cold. Outside the wind had died, but the trees swayed like they remembered what it meant to bend and not break. Talia's fingers brushed the rim of her bowl. "I keep thinking about the way Eli wrote that letter. How he didn't ask me to move on. He just told me to open the door." Colt looked at her eyes, shadowed but steady. Maybe he knew there wasn't a clean way forward. Just the choice to stop standing still. She met his gaze. "Are you still standing still?" "No," Colt said softly. "I think I started walking again the day I collapsed on your porch." Talia smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You could have kept riding. Could have gone somewhere else." "I didn't want somewhere else." A beat passed. Then she stood and walked to the fire, arms crossed tight over her chest. "Sometimes I feel like if I let go of the past completely, I lose him." "You don't," Colt said. "You carry him in the way you love, in the way you fight." "He's not behind you, Talia. He's in you." She turned to him, eyes wet but fierce. "And what about you?" "What are you carrying?" Colt hesitated. Then for the first time in years, he answered honestly. "I carry the boy I used to be, the one who thought dying in glory was the only way to matter, the one Eli pulled out of a trench and made believe in something bigger than himself." He stood, walked to her, and stopped just close enough to feel her breath. I carry the sound of his voice when he said, "Get it done, Colt." And I carry the fact that I lived when he didn't. Talia reached up and touched the collar of his coat, right where the insignia sat. "And now I carry you," he said. Her hand dropped. Her eyes didn't. "The closest two people can be is the space where neither has to speak to be understood," she whispered. Colt nodded. "And I hear you, even in your silence." She stepped forward, and he let her. She rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, not with urgency, but with the steadiness of someone who'd finally stopped running. They stood like that for a long time. No words, no storm, just the sound of 2 heartbeats finally keeping pace. Later that night, Colt sat outside on the porch, carving again. The shape in his hands was unfamiliar. Not a horse, not a bird, not a soldier. Just something forming itself from memory and quiet. Talia joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She handed him a cup of coffee, then leaned against the post beside him. "Something's changed," she said. "Everything has. I'm not sure I know what to do with peace." "You live in it," Colt replied. "You don't earn it. You just stop pushing it away." She studied him in the moonlight. "And what if it doesn't last? Then we fight for it." They sat for a while watching the moon rise. "You're not the man you were back then," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I had to lose everything to become the kind of man who deserved to come back." Talia reached down and touched the new carving in his lap. "What is it? I don't know yet," he said, "but it feels right." She smiled. "Let me know when it tells you." He looked at her. It already did. The next morning brought smoke, not from their chimney, from the woods. Colt saw at first a thin black ribbon curling above the tree line. Controlled, measured, but out of place. He didn't hesitate. Talia was already pulling her coat on by the time he grabbed the rifle. "You think it's Dawes?" she asked. "I think Dawes doesn't like being buried in silence." They saddled up and rode toward the ridge. Not fast, not panicked, but with the quiet certainty of people who had already walked through fire and come out standing. A man running from his past will always find it waiting by the fire. The smoke pulled them in like a trail of ink spilled across snow. Dark, controlled, intentional. Colt kept his eyes narrowed, rifle slung low but ready. Talia rode beside him, scanning the tree line, her shoulders squared beneath the weight of intuition. This wasn't Dawes trying to draw them out. It was something else. Something colder, older. The kind of danger that didn't need a name to be real. They found the fire in a clearing 2 miles out from the ridge, small, precise, no more than a signal. A lone rider stood beside it, his horse tethered to a branch, his back turned to the trail. He didn't look up when they arrived, just added another stick to the flames. Colt's hand hovered near the butt of his rifle. The man finally spoke. "Well, hell. Took you long enough?" The voice reached straight into Colt's bones, a sound wrapped in dust and judgment. Talia looked at him. "You know him?" Colt's jaw tightened. "Yeah. I know him." The man turned slowly. He was older now, gray in his beard lines carved deep across his face like dry riverbeds, but the eyes were the same, pale, patient, unforgiving. "Name's Rourke," the man said to Talia. "Bounty rider. Been tracking Harrigan here for a while." "You're late," Colt said flatly. "I like to make an entrance." He pulled a folded slip of paper from his coat and tossed it into the fire. The flames ate the edges fast, curling the parchment into smoke. "Wanted notice," he said. "Not official anymore. Not since the 7th folded and the war ended. But some names stick longer than they should." Talia stepped forward, steady but sharp. Why now Rourke didn't blink? Because Dawes opened his damn mouth. He's been floating lies across the state line, selling stories to every saloon and sheriff who'll listen. Said Harrigan here abandoned his post. Said he left a man to die. He spit into the fire. "I knew it was bull the second I heard it. I rode with Colt. Back before the desert chewed us all up. He was stubborn, reckless, but he never ran." Colt narrowed his eyes. "So why follow me?" Rourke gave a humorless smile. "Because stories like that catch wind, and when they do, they bring more than shame. They bring men looking to cash in, men with fewer scruples than me. Bounty hunters, Talia said. Real ones, Rourke confirmed, with old debts and short memories. I figure you've got a day, maybe two, before one of them rides in to make sure Dawes's version of the truth sticks harder than yours. Colt stared into the fire, the flames flickering like the edge of memory. All this, he said, over a lie. Doesn't matter if it's a lie, Rourke replied. Matters who tells it last. Talia stepped closer to Colt. Then we tell it louder. Rourke raised an eyebrow. You gonna go on a speaking tour, or are you gonna finish what Dawes started? Colt didn't answer, because deep down he already knew. He'd run far, he'd run long, but a man running from his past would always find it waiting by the fire, just like this. They rode back to the cabin in silence. Talia didn't press him. She could see it, the storm rebuilding in his eyes just when peace had finally begun to root. Back at the cabin, Colt unsaddled the horses and ran a hand through his hair. We need to be ready, he said. I already am. He looked up, surprised. Talia shrugged. You think I let you build a life here without learning how to shoot straight? Colt let out a short, dry laugh. Of course not. They spent the rest of the day checking ammunition, barricading weak spots, laying out food and water. It wasn't panic, it was preparation. Both of them knew the land better than anyone riding in. Still, the night fell heavy. By the fire, Rourke sat with a cup of coffee, his boots kicked out toward the warmth. He hadn't asked to stay, but neither had they told him to go. You never did answer, he said. Answer what? Why you didn't come back sooner. Townsfolk would have listened. Might have believed you. Colt stared into the flames. Because I believed it too. Not the lie that I ran, but the guilt. That Eli died, and I didn't. Rourke nodded slowly. Survivor's curse. Colt didn't flinch. You ever carry it? York's smile was bitter. Still am. Talia returned from the back room, her rifle slung over one shoulder. Then maybe it's time you both stop carrying it alone. The fire popped. A coal rolled free, pulsing red on the stone. Rourke looked at Colt. If you're gonna make a stand, you better do it clean, because these men won't stop with one knock on the door. They'll come until someone doesn't get up. I know, Colt said. Then you better be ready to end it. In the hours before dawn, Colt stood outside watching the sky go from black to gunmetal gray. He wasn't scared. He was clear. He wasn't that boy anymore. He wasn't a soldier chasing honor or a ghost chasing penance. He was a man standing where it mattered with someone who had chosen to stand beside him. And when the fire rose again in the distance, this time uncontrolled, bigger, redder, he didn't turn away. He walked back inside, met Talia's eyes, and said, They're coming. Some places don't just hold memories, they hold you accountable. The wind kicked up dust and ash as the sun broke across the ridge, lighting up the treetops like the world had caught fire. But it wasn't the sun burning. It was smoke. Dark columns curling up from the eastern pines, too close to be someone's camp, too clean to be an accident. They're flushing us, Rourke said, scanning the horizon from the porch, trying to drive us out before they ride in. Colt stood beside him, rifle already in his hands. He didn't flinch. They'll come hard. Dawn light's best for ambush. Shadows run long. Shots disappear into the trees. Rourke looked at him. You speak like you've planned this before. I have. Behind them, Talia emerged with her shotgun, her coat drawn tight, and her face stone still. She wasn't scared. She was resolved. What's the plan? She asked. Colt turned to face her. We don't wait inside. He pointed toward the ridge above the creek bed. They're expecting us to hold the cabin. We'll hit them before they settle in. Rourke gave a crooked smile. Thought we were trying to survive, not charge into hell. Colt met his eyes. This is survival. Just with teeth. Talia looked at both men. You sure about that ridge? It's where the wild turns, Colt said quietly. Where the trees thin and the rocks hold the wind. It's where Eli made his last stand. And where I ran out of chances. He paused, breathing deep. Some places don't just hold memories, they hold you accountable. The three of them rode out in silence, weaving through game trails and snow-heavy brush. Talia rode point, her eyes sweeping every bend. Rourke stayed back, watching the flank. Colt led them straight to the ridge, a place he hadn't seen in nearly 6 years, but could have found blindfolded. The ground was different now. Weathered, burned in places by old fires. But the rocks were the same. The view down into the valley still stretched wide, silent, dangerous. They reached the ridge just as the fire below crept higher. Rourke dismounted and crouched near a fallen pine. You see that? He asked, pointing toward movement between the trees. 4 men, 2 rifles, 1 scattergun. The last one's probably Dawes. Colt pulled his scope and confirmed. That's him, moving like a man who still thinks he's invincible. Talia settled behind a log, loading shells into her shotgun. They'll fan out and move in slow, expecting a defensive position, Good Colt said. That gives us the first shot. Rourke checked his revolver. 1 shot ain't enough. It doesn't need to be. They waited in the silence. Cold bit at their cheeks. Time crawled. Then the men broke the tree line. Dawes came first, flanked by 2 bounty riders. One had a brand on his neck, the other a crooked leg, and a shotgun held too high, nervous. Dangerous. Colt let them move closer. 20 yards. 15. Then he gave the signal. A short whistle. Crack. Rourke fired first, clean sharp, dropped the branded man in 1 shot. Talia opened up next, her shotgun roaring into the air, cutting the second man's momentum in half. Chaos. The third rider dove for cover. Colt stood from his crouch and fired, hitting the man square in the leg before turning toward Dawes. Dawes hadn't ducked. He stood there, rifle raised, eyes locked on Colt like it was a duel from the beginning. Don't, Colt shouted. Dawes didn't flinch. It was always gonna be one of us. He fired. Colt twisted the bullet, slicing past his shoulder. Colt fired back. Dawes stumbled, dropping to 1 knee, clutching his samide. Blood bloomed across his coat like a spreading lie. You left him, Dawes shouted. I stayed, Colt yelled back. You were the one who vanished. Dawes gritted his teeth, eyes wide with fury. He trusted you. He died for you, Colt said. And you still ran. Another shot cracked, not Colt's, not Rourke's. Talia had moved behind Dawes, silent through the trees, her rifle aimed square at his back. She didn't shoot again. Just stood there, breathing hard. Dawes dropped his gun, and with it the fight left his shoulders. Afterward, the wounded bounty rider was patched and tied. Dawes sat slumped against a rock, hand pressed to his side, watching Colt with something like hatred and something like surrender. I was supposed to be the hero, Dawes muttered. You had your chance, Colt said. You chose your own legend, and you'll get to keep yours. Colt shook his head. I don't want a legend. I just want peace. Dawes spat blood into the dirt. Ain't no such thing. Talia stepped forward. Then you'll die chasing something that never wanted you. Colt turned to Rourke. Can you take them back to town? Rourke nodded. They'll face what's left of the law. And what about you? Talia asked. Colt looked at her, then out at the place where Eli had fallen. I've got something left to do. He walked to the stone. It was still there, small, worn, half-buried under snow. The marker he'd placed the night Eli died. No name, just a scar in the earth. Colt knelt beside it and laid down a fresh carving. Not a cross, not a soldier, a circle, the one he'd finished the night before. Smooth, solid, whole. I made it back, he whispered. Took me too long. But I made it. He stayed there as the wind picked up. Not wild, not angry, just a wind that remembered. They buried the dead just outside the tree line. Rourke took Dawes and the wounded man and headed south, promising to tell the truth, or at least stop the lies. Colt and Talia rode home as the sun bled orange across the hills. Neither spoke for a long time. But when the cabin came into view, Colt reached across and took her hand just for a moment, and Talia didn't let go. A fire can burn you down, or it can warm the home you choose to stay in. The snow had stopped falling 2 days ago, but the air still held that heavy quiet of winter's breath, the kind of cold that didn't bite but settled, deep, slow, like it had no plans to leave. Colt chopped wood in the back sleeves rolled to his elbows, sweat cutting clean lines through the dirt on his arms. Each strike echoed into the trees, steady as a heartbeat. With every log split, he wasn't just preparing for another cold night, he was reminding himself that he'd survived the last one. Inside, Talia cleared out the back room. It had once been Eli's storage shed, a place for tools, hunting gear, spare saddle straps. But she'd been pulling down the old shelving, dusting off corners untouched since before the war. They weren't talking much. But it wasn't silence like before. It was peace. Heavy, maybe. Uneasy at times. But peace nonetheless. Colt came inside just as she was folding an old blanket over a cedar chest. He paused at the doorway, eyes flicking across the room. You're fixing it up, he said. Thought it might be time. For what? She hesitated, then turned to face him. For living. Colt leaned his axe against the wall and stepped in. You think we can just go back to that, Everything, Talia shrugged. I don't know. But I think we can start. They stood there in the afternoon light filtering through the frosted window. Dust hung in the air, like quiet memories catching in the beams. Eli would have liked this room cleaned up, she said. He'd have laughed at how long it took, Colt replied. That pulled a smile from her. A real one. She stepped closer, brushing sawdust from Colt's shoulder. You know there's still people out there who might come looking. Old names. Old blood. Colt nodded. There always will be. You ready for that? He looked at her, then down at her hand still resting on his arm. I'm ready to stop running from it. They stood that way for a long moment. Then Colt said, I was thinking, maybe we build on this room. Add something. A second door. Maybe even a window facing the ridge. Talia arched an eyebrow. You getting handy in your old age, I figure if the past is going to keep knocking, might as well let it see what it's interrupting. She laughed, then caught herself like the sound still surprised her. You're serious. He nodded. I want this to feel like ours, Colt said. Not something I borrowed. Not something Eli left behind. But something we both choose. Talia's smile faded, but not with sadness. with weight. The cabin already feels like that, she said. Not because of the walls, because we stayed when it would have been easier to ride on. Colt looked out the window toward the trees. The snow had started again, light feathery, like ash falling slow and harmless. A fire can burn you down, he murmured, or it can warm the home you choose to stay in. Talia looked at him. Which one is this, He met her eyes. Depends on how long we keep feeding it. That night they lit a fire not just in the hearth, but outside too. A controlled burn in the clearing beyond the barn meant to clear old brush, dead roots, tangled weeds. Colt worked the line with practiced care, walking the edge with a shovel and a bucket, eyes always on the flame's behavior. Talia stood by with water, her gaze flicking from the fire to Colt. He moved different now, not just with purpose, but with presence. He was here, finally. When the last of the brush caught and curled into glowing red, Colt stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Feels like we're burying something, he said. We are, Talia replied, but also planting. Colt tilted his head. Planting what? She smiled. Room to grow. Later, by the indoor fire, Colt pulled something from his coat, a small worn pouch. Talia watched him unwrap it slowly. Inside was a ring, not gold, not polished, but carved from the same cedar that lined the old chest in Eli's room. The same wood Colt had carved the circle from. I made this before Dawes came back, Colt said. Didn't know why I was doing it at the time. Talia looked at the ring, then back at him. You do now. He nodded. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know what I want to fight for. And I want you to know, I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm asking if I can be part of what comes next. Talia took the ring, held it between her fingers, feeling its weight. It wasn't perfect, slight grooves from the carving knife, uneven grain, but it was real, honest. I don't want to forget him, she said quietly, but I also don't want to live in a house of ghosts. Colt leaned forward. Then let's make something new together. She didn't answer right away. She slid the ring onto her finger, and that was enough. That night they slept with the windows cracked. The cold didn't scare them anymore. It reminded them they were alive. But down in the valley, hooves hit frozen dirt. Not fast, not reckless, measured. Another rider, coat dusted in soot, eyes scanning the hills, a letter tucked in his coat bearing the seal of a dead regiment. He wasn't coming to settle old scores. He was coming because word traveled faster than bullets. And someone somewhere had decided Colt Harrigan still owed a debt. The wind that morning wasn't cruel. It carried the scent of ash and pine, soft and clean, curling through the open window, where Colt sat sharpening his knife. Each stroke against the whetstone whispered like breath through dry grass, steady, deliberate. Talia was in the kitchen humming faintly as she kneaded dough. No words between them yet, but none needed. It was the kind of silence that only comes after surviving something that could have ended you and choosing not to let it. Then they heard the horse. Just one. The sound came from the south ridge. Not fast, not frantic, just purposeful. Colt stood slowly. Talia looked up but said nothing. She just wiped her hand, dried them on her apron, and walked to the door with him. He squinted into the light. The rider came into view around the bend, a man in a dark coat, broad-brimmed hat pulled low, and a paper folded tight in one hand. The horse beneath him was lean and sure-footed, like it had made long miles without complaint. As the stranger rode closer, Colt stepped off the porch, one hand resting near his belt, not reaching, just waiting. When the man finally dismounted, he didn't speak right away. just removed his gloves and looked up at Colt like someone measuring weight, not size. "You Harrigan?" he asked. "I am." The man nodded once, then held out the folded paper. "Message for you. Came down from Carson Range. Long trail through dead ground." Colt took the paper but didn't open it yet. "You a courier?" he asked. Once the man said, "Now I just deliver what's left when war ends and no one knows what to do with the survivors." Colt glanced at the seal. It was real. Burned into the wax the old crest of the 7th. Half recognized, half forgotten. "Most of us are gone," the man continued. "You're one of the last. Word is they've finally closed the ledger. Your name's off the roll." Colt felt something hollow stir in his chest, relief maybe, or the slow ache of being seen and released in the same breath. "Why bring it now?" The man shrugged. "Because unfinished stories don't bury themselves." He turned to mount up again. "What's your name?" Colt asked. The man paused, looking over his shoulder. "Doesn't matter anymore." Then he rode off, dust trailing behind him like a ghost, finally letting go. Inside, Colt laid the paper on the table. Talia stood beside him, waiting. He didn't read it out loud. Didn't need to. It was short. Official. But buried in the bureaucratic phrasing was something that hit him hard. "Your name has been cleared. Your service noted. No further pursuit to be undertaken." It didn't rewrite the past. Didn't change the blood spilled or the names lost. But it freed him. Talia reached across the table and touched his hand. "You okay?" she asked. Colt exhaled, then smiled. "I think I am." He folded the paper not with reverence but finality. "It's over." Talia nodded. "Then maybe now we can start." They spent the day rebuilding the back wall of the shed, expanding it like they'd talked about. Colt measured the beams. Talia hammered the joints. It wasn't fast work, but it was honest. Real. Late in the afternoon, a group from town arrived, Mika Yazzie among them, bringing food and laughter and wood for the fire. No one asked about Dawes. No one asked about the past. They just helped. By nightfall, the frame of the new room stood tall and clean under the stars. They built a fire outside, not for survival this time, but for celebration. Rourke showed up with a bottle of something strong and an old fiddle he couldn't play worth a damn. Talia laughed more than Colt had ever heard. And Colt. He sat back in a chair made from cedar and leather, watching the sparks dance up into the sky. For once, he didn't feel like a mamun borrowed from the past. He felt like a man becoming. Later that night, long after the fire burned down and the others had gone home, Colt and Talia stood at the edge of the new room. No walls yet. Just framing. Just possibility. He held her hand, thumb tracing circles across her knuckles. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "But I try not to write it too soon. Life doesn't care for clean outlines." Colt looked up at the stars. "No," he said. "But it does reward those who stay long enough to find their place under them." She leaned against his shoulder. "You think this is ours," she whispered. "I know it is." The wind picked up, rattling the trees just enough to remind them the world was still wild, still capable of turning rough. But the cabin stood strong, and inside it 2 people who had once been lost found not just shelter, not just healing, but each other. A few days later, the letter was gone, tossed into the fire without ceremony. The past had spoken, the present had listened, and the future, well, it no longer needed to carry the weight of ghosts. Because the truth, The real truth was this: you can survive a war. You can survive lies. You can even survive your trust yourself. But it takes something braver to build again after all of it. To choose love without forgetting loss. To stand still without feeling trapped. To forgive yourself. And to stay.